Okay, welcome all. I am Batya Wiesenfeld, and I'm going to do a very brief introduction before getting to the, the person that you're here to see. So first, I want to acknowledge that this is the Haitkin Lecture. We have some members of the Haitkin family here. The lecture was endowed by Jeffrey Haitkin, a graduate of NYU Stern's undergraduate program in 1968. Jeffrey Haitkin recognized the extraordinarily important role of business in society more broadly, and his ethos of enhancing the positive social impact of business has become a defining feature of our undergraduate business program here at Stern. At Stern, the Business and Society program in particular was established with the belief that business schools should be drawing attention to and helping people understand the societal impact of business models and competitive activity in the marketplace. Our Center for Business and Human Rights, led by Professor Michael Posner, our Center for Sustainable Business, led by Professor Tansy Whalen, and Professor Jonathan Haidt's lab group on technology and society are the perfect embodiment of how the Business and Society program is developing this ethos, the Haitkin ethos, of understanding and improving business practice for the good of society. Professor Jonathan Haidt has had a long and illustrious career. He received his PhD in psychology from the University of Pennsylvania and then taught in the psychology department of the University of Virginia. But then, and early on in those roles, he established a worldwide reputation as one of the leading scholars in research on happiness, emotion, moral intuition, moral psychology, and political psychology. Then, John spent 1 year visiting NYU as a Paduano Fellow and became passionate about the potential for impact and impact through business. Tonight, John will be talking about one of the biggest issues relevant to business and society today, social media and mental health. We live in an era in which a handful of companies now exert enormous influence over public discourse, social connections, and information flows. Meta's platforms alone connect over 3 billion people globally. Platforms are incentivized to maximize engagement and absorb attention, often leading them to amplify emotionally triggering, divisive, or sensationalistic content. John has observed that social media combines massive reach with a number of risks. They include powerful psychological effects on everything from mental health to social cohesion to trust, challenging business incentives that motivate exploitation, such as of market inefficiencies and negative externalities and information asymmetries, and inadequate governance mechanisms that can't keep up with the rapid evolution of complex platforms, and how that makes social media one of the most consequential issues in the business-society interface in our time. So John has turned Stern and BSP into the launchpad of a global movement to change childhood and change society. And that is what we're going to be hearing about tonight. In terms of structure, we can expect there will be about 50 minutes of presentation, of lecture. Then we will open it up to questions. And I know that those of you who are from Stern, are some of you who have 6 o'clock classes. We ask that you sit close to the aisles so that you can more easily leave for your classes if need be. We will have time for questions, and we will be prioritizing the students because the students are of the generation that is most directly impacted, where their lives have been most directly impacted by the phenomena that John is talking about. So just that is a little bit of background. Join me in appreciating Jonathan Haidt for everything that he is doing in this movement.
Well, thanks so much, Batya. You said I've turned Stern into a launch pad, and I think that's right. I was walking into the building a few weeks ago, and I was reflecting on just all that's changing around the world. I'm going to tell you about the book and what's happened since the book and how the change is happening on this issue all around the world. And I was thinking, how did this happen? And then I realized, if you're going to stand anywhere on Earth and try to change the world, well, New York City. I mean, there is no place better than New York City. And if you're going to be in New York City, well, there's no place better than NYU. And then, there's another university, but they're so far uptown, they're not even close to any of the things that matter. And if you're going to be at NYU and you're dealing with the biggest impact that companies are having on the world, well, then you need to be at Stern. And if you're going to be in Stern, well, BSP is the area that was created to do exactly that. So I'm just really grateful that I fell in, like almost by accident. I came here, my wife and I came here for a year when my second book was coming out. And I didn't have any particular interest in business, but I found actually it's really fascinating from a psychological point of view. And I co-taught with Bruce Buchanan, and he liked me, I liked him, and Bruce came to me and said, would you consider staying? And so that changed my life, and here I am, and I'm so glad that I did. And so thank you especially to the Haitkin family for supporting BSP and making it possible for people like me to do this kind of work. Okay, so now let me tell you about what I think is happening. Let me make clear. I'm going to present a portrait of Gen Z, that is people born after 1995. And while it's a kind of a frightening portrait, I hope it'll be clear. I'll just say it again explicitly up front, and I hope this comes through in the book. There is zero judgment. This is not about, and there's no criticism here. I mean, there's criticism of the platforms, but what this really is a detective mystery. Something happened in the early 2010s, and it happened globally. And so we're going to try to figure out what happened and how do we reverse it. So to start, I want you to think about the way that roots grow. And this is going to be a good metaphor for how neurons grow. So here you see a picture of a tree. The roots went out. And clearly, as the roots were growing, they kind of discovered, oh, there's water here. We'll grow here. And so the external world structured this very unusual pattern of root growth. And here you see a Civil War era tombstone. There was a tree growing up behind it. I guess with the wind, it scratched the bark, and then the tree grew around the tombstone. So think about tree growth. Okay, now think about bone growth. Half of American teens say that they are online almost constantly. So if the phone is always in your hand, you might find that the hand that holds the phone, as the bones grow, it's usually there, those bones are going to be slightly deformed. If you're over 30, don't bother looking because you went through puberty without this. But if you're under 30, you might want to check to see whether your two pinkies are symmetrical. Even for those of us who are older than this, a lot of us are having neck pain, joint pain, hand pain, because we didn't evolve to spend so much time hunched over a little screen. The clearest evidence of physical change, that this phone-based life is changing our bodies, the clearest change is in eyeballs. Human eyeballs are getting longer. They no longer focus on the retina anymore as much. There's a shift towards myopia or nearsightedness and the reason is because kids are spending so much time inside. If we gave all kids an extra hour or two outdoors a day, it would cure this problem. But they get so little sunlight, so little long distance vision, so much close screen work, that eyeballs are changing shape around the world. And bodies are changing shape. I've seen various estimates. Kids get something on the order of 12 or 13 minutes of vigorous exercise a day on average, and they get 8 to 10 hours of solitary, motionless screen time outside of school. So this is a photograph of an actual Gen Z brain, as drawn by Midjourney, an AI program. But I drew this after I saw this picture here, because I think there's a kind of a similarity. I think that our brains, just as those roots grow around shaped by the environment, our brains are now growing around our phones with a wide variety of results. So the story that I tell in The Anxious Generation is about the great rewiring of childhood. Something happened to childhood, and it's a tragedy in 2 acts. In Act 1, we lose the play-based childhood, and this happened gradually. Anybody over than 35 or so almost certainly played outside, and some of us grew up during a giant crime wave in the 70s and 80s, but all kids went out to play. But that stops in the 90s. We stop letting our kids out. And then in Act 2, it's a very, very sudden, powerful act. It's just in the space of 5 years, new technology comes out which changes everything. And I'll cover that in just a few minutes. One way I can summarize the entire book is by saying that we have overprotected our children in the real world, and we have underprotected our children online. So here's the structure of my talk. I've already gone through the first part, the physical harms. Let's talk now about mental illness, which is where most of the research is. This is the main area of discussion, but as I'll show, there's so much more. And I'm realizing, after the book came out, I'm realizing that I actually underestimated the harm because I focused on mental illness. And there's so much else going on, which I'll tell you about today. So I first got into this topic, as Batya said, I study moral psychology, morality and politics, but I got into this topic because around 2014, I and many other college professors began noticing that the students coming in were just very different from everything we'd seen in our teaching careers. So these were the rates of various disorders and disabilities before 2012, when all of the students were millennials, born 1981 through 1995. But as we go on, past 2012, Gen Z begins to arrive, and the levels go up. What's the yellow line? The yellow line is psychological disorders. So that's the main difference between Gen Z and the millennials. Gen Z has much higher rates of psychological and psychiatric disorders. Here's additional data gathered from university health services around the country. And what you see is, in all the graphs I'm going to show you, there's no trend before 2010. And then 2010 to 2015 is the great rewiring period. That's where things change, and the trends tend to go beyond that. So these are the reasons why American undergraduates come into the counseling center. What is their presenting problem? And what we see is during this period, everything goes up, but it's especially rates of anxiety and depression go way, way up. So that now a quarter of college students have an anxiety disorder. It wasn't like that in 2012 or 2010. And it's not that, the world's just getting scary and we're all more anxious, right? Well, not exactly. When we break it up by age, what we see is that the rise is primarily among the youngest group in this survey. And you do get some, especially late millennials, are there, of course, it's not an instant gap between generations. The late millennials are kind of, convergent with Gen Z. But the older generations, Gen X and Boomers, we don't really see an increase. So it only affected young people, whatever it is. We always, when we look at internalizing disorders, that is anxiety and depression, we always find that girls have higher rates than boys. And this is what happened to the rates of depression now this is not college students anymore. This is a nationally representative survey of American teens. Now, a couple interesting things. One is that while depression and anxiety are now very characteristic of American girlhood, if you're an American teenage girl, there's better than a 30% chance, something around 40% likelihood that you have either an anxiety disorder or depression. That's just a normal thing. 20% of American teens have thought seriously about suicide, and that's higher among girls. But interestingly, the relative increase is sometimes around the same ballpark. So boys are up too. I'm not saying boys are fine, they're not, and I'll talk about them a little more later. But another thing to notice, in many of the graphs we find that the boys' curve is more gradual, whereas the girls, there's an elbow at 2012, and things go way up after 20, very, very sharp, and it's not like that for the boys. And you can see here, COVID mattered, but not very much. This was all baked in before COVID. And so some of my critics have said, Haidt is just fomenting a moral panic. The old people, they always think that this is happening to kids. And really, all he's talking about is self-report data, which is a good thing that Gen Z is comfortable admitting it. That's all. It's just destigmatized. Gen Z is willing to admit it, whereas previous generations did not. But if that was the case, then we would not see the same patterns in behavior, but we do. This is rates of emergency room visits for younger teens. Now, so I'm showing you the data for the younger teens because that's where you get the huge increases. The older teens, you get big increases too. But whatever it is, it especially honed in on girls aged 10 to 14. That's where you see the biggest change. And so look at these rates of self-harm. No change before 2010, and then this happens. A quadrupling. Young girls didn't used to cut themselves, but now they do. Now, boys are up too, but again, from such a much lower rate that it's not nearly as noticeable. And we see the same thing with suicide. Now, with suicide, boys have higher rates. Girls make more attempts, but they tend to use reversible means. Boys tend to use a gun or a tall building, at least in the United States. And so what we get is boys have higher rates, but it's up a lot for both boys and girls, roughly doubling for both boys and girls, at least for the younger teens. So my point is this shows up for behavior. This is not just about self-report. And what really stunned me when I started working on a book on what social media is doing to democracy, and I thought I'd start the book with this research I had left over from my last book, The Coddling the American Mind. I thought I'd start it with what happened to teens when they moved onto social media. But once my research partner and I, Zach Roush, once we discovered that actually, wait, this is happening in all the English-speaking countries and most of Europe, as far as we can tell, we realized something huge is going on planet Earth. So here's similar data from Britain. This is not self-report. This is doctor records, medical records. Some researchers analyzed them, no trend before 2010, and then this happens. Again, someone turned a switch somewhere around 2012, and girls all around the world started cutting themselves and checking into emergency rooms. Australia, the curve is a little less sharp, but again, very much the same trends. So that's my point about mental illness. Now let's talk about why is this happening. So we have a mystery. Since the early 2010s, young people across the developed world, we don't have good data from the developing world, but across the developed world where kids got smartphones around the same time, in the early 2010s, we find that young people are becoming more anxious, depressed, and lonely, more likely to harm and kill themselves. As I'll show you, they're becoming less educated, less able to focus, hence functionally less intelligent, behaving as if their IQ had gone down. Not that their IQ has literally gone down, but they're functioning as if they were less intelligent than they are. Now, why did this happen? And some critics say, well, there's all kinds of reasons. And I say, okay, like what? Like what could have affected so many countries? Well, the global financial crisis. But if you look closely, what you see, in the black line shows you that unemployment doubled in the United States between 2007 and 2010. It was dark times for a lot of families. But what happens to the depression rates of boys and girls? Nothing. It doesn't change. And then after 2010, 2011, unemployment starts going down, down, down. And it goes down throughout the 2010s. What happens to depression? Up, up, up. There is no economic factor that I have ever found that matches up, that can explain why mental health plunged in so many countries around 2012. There's only one theory out there that I know of, and it's my theory, that we change childhood in a two-step process, and it's especially the second act is the one that really did the damage, or did more damage directly to mental health, but okay. So I can demonstrate the two halves of this like this. I can show you how childhood changed just by asking you all when you were let out. So I want everybody in this room to think about the age at which you got freedom, the age at which you could go outside, get on your bicycle, go to a friend's house, walk, well, let's leave aside walking to school. That's sometimes a little different. But the age when you could just play outside without any adult supervision. So if that was you in first grade, then your number is 6. You're going to call out 6 when I tell you. But if you didn't get that freedom until you were in 9th grade, then you would say 14, okay? So everyone, you got your number? Don't say it. Now we're going to answer by generation. So everybody who was born before 1981, raise your hand high. Okay, so you're all boomers and Gen X, and my father-in-law is almost greatest generation. He's 97 years old. and he still does his own gardening. So just those of you who raised your hand. So when I'm going to point my finger around the room. When I point at you, just yell out your numbers. I'm doing this so that we can hear each other talking, okay? So older people, yell out your number. What is it? Okay, almost perfect uniformity. I've never gotten it that perfect. We have a very large room. No, usually there's a couple of 10s and 12s. But here, we have a large room. Everybody who was born before 1980, 6 to 8. Like, if there was a 4th grader who wasn't let out to play, we'd be like, somebody called the police. Something must be going on. Like, why don't they let that kid out? Well, now so this is what I always find. All right, so now let's look at Gen X. So if you were, I'm not Gen X, I'm sorry, Gen Z. So if you were born in 1996 or later, raise your hand high right now. Okay, so a lot of undergrads and some grad students. So you're all Gen Z. So now I'm going to ask you to yell out your number. Ready? Yell it out. Was that a 16? Okay. All right. So what I usually find, you could see it was the mode here. It was mostly double-digit numbers. It was mostly 10 to 12. There were a couple of 6s, there were a couple of 8s. What I usually find is that the 6s grew up in a Nordic country or Germany or Switzerland. There are some countries that still let kids out, but English-speaking countries don't. So right there you can see, in the 90s is when everything changed. Crime rates were plunging. Drunk driving was taken off the street by legislation and Mothers Against Drunk Driving. But the 90s is when we lost trust in our neighbors, we stopped letting our kids out, we freaked out about child abduction. So we changed childhood. So that's Act 1 of the tragedy. Now, Act 2, you can see in this chart. So with communication technologies, there's always a period when everyone is getting it, because you see everybody else getting it. And what I didn't realize until I found this graph while writing the book is that the internet came in 2 waves, and the first was magnificent. So the first PCs were not that useful, but then when the internet comes out, then it gets much more useful. You had dial-up, but you could reach all the information in the world. It was amazing. When web browsers come out, do you want omniscience? Do you want to just know everything instantly? Yeah, that's pretty cool. So the early internet was amazing, and the millennials grew up on that early internet. And they came out fine, and they're a creative generation. They started companies, they take risks, they travel around the world. So we're all techno-optimists. We all think, wow, this is the way of the future. And we're kind of happy to have our kids play with this technology. We think maybe something will rub off, and maybe they'll start a tech company too. What we didn't realize is that the second wave of technology was fundamentally different than the first. And it begins with social media, which begins in 2003. You get Friendster, MySpace, and Facebook. And those are very, very popular, rising very fast. And then you get the iPhone in 2007, although teens don't really get it until more like 2011, 2012. But you see they rise very, very fast. And it's this second wave. This is when the phone-based childhood begins. This is when mental health collapses. Incidentally, and this is another talk, this is also when democracy declines. Democracy was rising and improving during the first wave, and then it turns around and is going downhill ever since 2011, 2012. Okay. I can illustrate exactly what happened by walking you through what was it like to go through puberty, depending on when you were born. So suppose, is there anyone here born in 1995? Raise your hand. Okay, so a couple of you were born in 1995. So what that means is that you turned 15 in 2010. And so do you remember, what was your first phone? Do you remember what your first mobile phone was? A Samsung that you could flip open? You could slide it. Okay, okay. When did you get your first iPhone or a smartphone? At 15. Oh, 14. Okay. So you're through the first couple of years of puberty, but for the most part, those born in and you're the very last year of the millennials, so you're getting a little bit earlier. But what you see is that the millennials went through puberty mostly with flip phones, like the Razor is what a lot of the millennials remember fondly. Remember the game Snake? I don't, because I'm not a millennial, but I hear that you all played Snake. That was it. You could call, you could text, you could play Snake. That was about it. There was no attention economy, or at least not any different from how it had been decades before. But suppose you were born just 5 years later. Suppose you were born in the year 2000. Raise your hand if you're born in the year 2000. Who was born in 2000? Were you born in 2000? Anyone? Okay, if you're born in the year 2000, you turned 15 in 2015. And you probably got you almost certainly had a smartphone by the time you're 15, and probably it was your first phone. It's very different. A smartphone you can use it as a phone, although it's rarely used for that. It's a supercomputer by which strangers can get to you and ask you for things, by which you can talk to strangers and broadcast your brand. So and you have unlimited interruptions. There were no push notifications on a flip phone, but push notifications from all these companies. It vibrates in your pocket. Yes, what's going on? So you have this new attention economy in which you are the product, not the customer. This is the great rewiring of childhood. You can see it also in this picture. This is what childhood used to be like. And those of you who grew up in the 80s, you remember, like, if you find an extraterrestrial while you're out with your friends, you just put them in your basket. You have all kinds of adventures. That's just what we did. But this is what childhood has become. If you're a girl, it's mostly on social media. And if you're a boy, you cannot go to your friend's house if you want to play, because you can't play video games. You have to go to your house and put on your headset, your controller. Then you can play with your friends. And so childhood has become very solitary compared to any other period in human history. You can see this in this graph as well. This is time spent with friends, the American Time Use Survey. And the top line shows how many hours a day people are spending with their friends outside of work and school. So the top line is the youngest group, 15 to 24. And what you can see here is that back in the early 2000s, they were spending 2 hours a day with their friends outside of school. And it is dropping during that time. They're spending more time online. But you get a really sharp drop or accelerated drop during the Great Rewiring period. And then I want you to notice the second to last year is 2019, before COVID. And the last year is 2020, May of 2020, the height of COVID lockdowns. What happens? You see on all the older generations, you see that little bend at the end? You can see the effect of COVID lockdowns on the older generations. But what do we see for Gen Z? There's no bend, because they were dropping at such a fast rate. It was as though they began social distancing as soon as they got their first iPhone. And by 2019, they were almost done. And then COVID just finished it off, just pushed it down a little further. And even the time that they are with their friends, the question is, are they all looking at their own phone, or are they all looking at one phone together? Okay, I'm exaggerating a bit, but a lot of the time with friends is actually time on the phone. And we don't wait until they get a smartphone at puberty. We give them screens as soon as they're old enough to cry, and we want to shut them up. So here's a video that a proud dad put up of his son. Look how fast he is. Look how quickly he can handle 2 screens at once. Now, what I want you to think about the neurons growing in his frontal cortex. Those neurons are growing, guided by the local environment. Imagine that this boy gets that level of stimulation for several hours every day for his entire childhood. That's going to affect brain growth. We've all discovered that, I heard this shocking statistic, oh, here it is, this shocking statistic just a couple of weeks ago. 40% of American 2-year-olds have their own iPad. And then a lot of the rest have their own iPhone, just not with a cellular plan. But we all have an old iPhone rattling around, the kids crying, here, play with this. And it works. It quiets them. So does morphine. So our kids are now being raised on screens, on very fast-moving, colorful touch screens. And this new phone-based childhood, I have a whole chapter on what I call the 4 foundational harms. These are just major changes that are going to affect life and emotions and mental health. I've already talked about social deprivation. Sleep deprivation is kind of obvious. I want to especially zoom in. The third one I'm coming to see, this is probably going to be the biggest one of all. I'm now thinking this is going to be even bigger as sort of a damage to human capital, damage to human potential, damage to human flourishing. I think this one's going to be even bigger than the mental health crisis. So let me talk about attention fragmentation. So you all know how fracking works, how there's oil in rocks and we thought we couldn't get it. So, oil drilling is you look for pools of oil. But I forget the history of this. Somehow some people discovered that if you pump water and steam and you break up the rocks and then you push water in, you can push out little bits of oil and they add up. And it's changed America's energy status. So that's fracking for oil. But you can also frack for attention. And this was not possible before 2010. But what happens, once you have a smartphone with all these apps and push notifications, Now, smartphones can grab every moment. There's a useful term, interstitial. The interstices are the spaces between things, like the space between tiles, or the space in your schedule between classes, or when you're waiting in the elevator, or you're waiting to be served at a restaurant. All these things are little bits of time. And it used to be that sometimes we would just sit there. Older people, do you remember sometimes just like looking out a window and just like thinking? Raise your hand if you ever did that, okay? But, okay, I'm exaggerating a bit, but young people, if you always have a phone, you don't need to ever be bored. So, and we see this all over Stern, you know, and look, and we do it too. But we're waiting for the elevator, the phone comes out. You're in the elevator, there's somebody you kind of know, the phone comes out because it's less awkward than talking to them. So the phone can take every single moment, not just the interstitial moments. It can take time when you should be talking with your boyfriend or girlfriend or parents or whatever. So my point is that the modern attention economy that has wrought such havoc only begins in the early 2010s. It wasn't like this in 2009. When we look at the degree to which teens are interrupted, there's many different studies, but this particular one found that teens got on average 237 notifications a day. Many of my students here at NYU get a notification every time they get an email. They're on many group texts. When you add it up, a number of them are getting more than 1,000 notifications a day, which means they never have 5 or 10 minutes uninterrupted. There's always something coming in. That's attention fragmentation. TikTok is the worst. I used to think that Instagram was the worst, and I do think it's the worst for girls' mental health. But for attention fracking, nothing can match the technology of TikTok. And we all know this, and they know it. So these companies are being sued by so many parents whose kids are dead that there's all kinds of documents coming out in the litigation. And so at my Substack, After Babel, we have a post. We just took TikTok's own words, embedded in the legal brief, but you can see they're in their own words. For example, in one internal report, this is a TikTok employee writing to other TikTok employees. Compulsive usage correlates with a slew of negative mental health effects. Imagine your kids, imagine a whole generation spending hours and hours a day on TikTok, the most widely used of all the platforms. And what does it cause? Loss of analytical skills, memory formation, loss of contextual thinking, conversational depth, empathy, and increased anxiety. It interferes with essential responsibilities like sleep, work, and connecting with loved ones. This sounds okay to me for my kids. They spend 6 hours a day on this, right? I mean, my God, what are we doing? They know they are doing this. And the net effect is national and global. So Derek Thompson had an article out a little more than a year ago. It sure looks like the phones are making students dumber. And he was covering these databases we have that track students over decades. In the US, we have the National Assessment of Educational Progress, and you can see that we made very steady, slow, it's not a big increase, but we were able to increase the average reading and math ability of American kids from the 70s through 2012, and then this happens, it goes down. Now everyone freaks out when this came out 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, because they all said, oh, COVID, look what COVID did. Look what COVID restrictions did, this was terrible. But if it was COVID, then you'd expect at some point it would recover. And people didn't comment on how the downturn didn't start in 2020, it started in 2012. So this is a national loss of education that began well before COVID. And about a month or two ago, we just got the 2024 results in, and what you can see is that there still is no post-COVID recovery. Now, this graph is one that breaks up the scores by quartile. So if you take so on a national exams, you take the top quarter. How did the top quarter of students, the most able academically, how did they fare? And you see that they're down a little, and there's no post-COVID recovery. But take a look at the bottom, and you see this in every data set I've looked at. Whatever it is that's been happening since 2010, it's hitting the lower performing students the most, it's hitting the kids from low SES families the most. So whatever is happening is a gigantic counter-equity movement. We are getting increasing class, social class differentiation in this country. It's harming those kids the most. And it's not just us. This is the PISA data set. This is global score. This is a global test over 37 countries. And again, no trend before 2010, and then this happens. So around the world, humanity is becoming functionally less intelligent. at just the moment when our machines are becoming rapidly more intelligent. I think this is really worrisome. Many of you have heard this Atlantic article got a lot of play in the academic world. Many of us are finding that our students have trouble reading whole books. They're not used to it. They haven't read many books. They weren't assigned many books in high school. They just find it difficult to read a book. One of my students, I teach a flourishing class here, we talk about these issues. And one of my students last fall said, I open a book, I read a sentence, I get bored, I go to TikTok. Okay, but you know what? Technology might have damaged the ability to pay attention, but technology to the rescue. My students in the fall told me about a program called PDF to Brain Rot. So suppose I assigned this psychology paper by me and Jean Twenge. So suppose I assign this. Now this is hard to read. It's got lots of pages and it's kind of boring. No problem. Go to PDF to Brain Rot, upload the PDF, drop it in there, choose the background. Which video game do you want in the background while you're reading it? Oh, and you don't have to really read it. It's going to use AI to condense it down to a paragraph or two, and it's going to read it to you word by word. Here you go. So I chose Subway Surfer because my kids loved Subway Surfer. Here we go. Here is Twenge and Haidt, 2002.
Global trends in adolescent loneliness. Skibidi boom. The world is feeling the goon vibes of loneliness hitting teens. From 2012 to 2018, almost every country saw a spike in school loneliness, especially among girls. It is like a Sigma grinds that gone wrong, with social media and smartphones turning friendships into toilet bowl reflections of despair. The dank truth is, while unemployment kept loneliness low-key, the internet age has made the youth feel isolated. This ship of psychological well-being is sinking, riding the edge of negative vibes.
Okay, anyway, all right. It's actually, that's actually about it. I mean, that's the depth of it right there. It ends a few seconds later. So when you think about an entire planet full of young people going through puberty on TikTok, except in China where they give them a healthier version. But for us, we have TikTok. It's turning out that people are beginning to notice that humanity is getting dumber, as it were. Just a few days ago, an article in the FT, Byrne Murdoch put together a bunch of studies. And here's an item on a long-running measure we give to American high school students. How often have you had difficulty thinking or concentrating in the last 30 days? How often have you had trouble learning new things? And you can see that before 2010, there was a little increase on the left and no increase on the right. But then we get to 2010, and then this happens. So American students are reporting that they're just having a lot more trouble thinking, concentrating, and learning new things. We're in the education business. This is code red. This is a complete disaster. And he goes through, I urge you to read this article. Well, the FT is expensive and there's a huge paywall for it, but I have a tweet that summarizes it. And I'll feed it into PDF to Brain Rot. But it turns out it's not just happening to kids. There's even some evidence that even adults we're all feeling overwhelmed. There's just too much stuff coming in. So this is affecting humanity. And I'll just say a little bit about girls versus boys because it's different stories. The girl story is very much about social media. The evidence, I think, is very clear that social media, heavy use of social media, is directly correlated and causes depression and anxiety and eating disorders and other things in teen girls, especially younger teen girls. I'm having a debate with some other psychologists who say it's just correlation, it's not causation, but I have multiple kinds of evidence, including, as you saw, testimony from the perpetrators, like they know they're doing this. So I won't go through all of this. I'll just bring out two of them. So we all know that girls are subject to a lot more comparison based on their looks, and there's a lot more pressure to look a certain way. And so this is a Danish influencer, that's her on the bottom right, but she's just demonstrating that all you have to do is sort of turn the dial, as it were, and you can look more and more like a standard Instagram beauty. So this is all just devastating to girls, especially in early puberty, when they're just really, everyone's changing, they're self-conscious. The movie Mean Girls is high school kids, and of course it's Hollywood, so it's actually 26-year-old actors pretending to be 17-year-old actors. And they could be pretty nasty with flip phones back then. But once everything goes onto Instagram and Snapchat, This supercharges the bullying, the cyberbullying, and it peaks not in high school. Bullying peaks in 7th and 8th grade. This I think is why those teen girl suicide numbers are up so much. Because if the entire school is laughing at you, the entire school is united in mocking you for this thing that you said or that someone said about you, or a video that someone took when you were in the bathroom, or whatever it is, you're going to think of suicide because you want to disappear. Shame makes you want to disappear. And shame at this level is as painful as could be. So that's just a little preview of the girl's story. There's a lot more in chapter 6. The boy's story wasn't as clear to me when I started writing the book. It really helped when I read Richard Reeves' book of Boys and Men. He traces out how boys have been dropping out of the real world since the 70s. Boys used to dominate school and certainly university, but no longer. Boys have been retreating. They do less well in school. They show up less often for school. They graduate less often. At every level from kindergarten through PhD, girls and women are outperforming boys and men. Something's happening to boys and men. They're dropping out. And part of it, and Richard doesn't, I mean, it's a wonderful book. He doesn't talk about technology, though. And so I told Richard, you have to look at the video games. You have to look at the technology. Because as this is happening in the 80s and 90s, the virtual world is becoming amazing. The video games get better and better. Older people, we remember Pong, right? Could you imagine playing Pong for 6 hours a day? Okay, it wouldn't make any sense. But World of Warcraft and the incredible high definition multiplayer games, they're really amazing feats of creativity and engineering and psychological manipulation. So so for boys, the key thing to think about is not social media and depression. I think it's superstimulation and dopamine. That's the thing to focus on. But I'll come back to that in a moment. But boys basically are no longer doing the things that would toughen them and turn them into men. All over the world, going from girl to woman is a journey, but going from boy to man in traditional societies is a much bigger journey because you have to leave the world of women and mothers and enter the world of men, especially if it's a warrior culture. So there are often rituals of toughening and separation, but we don't have anything like that. And you can see the change in male behavior in this graph. This is the most surprising graph in the book. Let's look at the right side first. The CDC tracks why people go into hospitals because they want to know early detection. Is something weird happening? And so they track broken bones. Are people breaking bones? Who do you think, what age group do you suppose breaks bones the most? Teenagers, you'd think, right? And what you see on the right, the orange line is the teenagers. And so teenage girls used to be the highest, along with girls in their 20s, the most likely to break a bone and go into the hospital. And over time, that drops a little bit. And then when we get into this period, the teenage girls drop, so now they're tied with their mothers. So they've dropped more. Teenage girls are down more than any other group. But it's not a big effect, okay? Let's look at the boys. So as you can see, teenage boys, the orange line, they're by far the world champions in broken bones. Bicycle ramps, climbing on rooftops, climbing trees, physical fights, exploring dangerous places. This is what we just sort of assume teenage boys do. And that's what they used to do. But look what happens when we get into the Great Rewiring period. Teenage boys used to be the most likely. Now they are less likely than their fathers or grandfathers to break a bone because they're not doing anything that could break a bone. They're just playing video games and porn. This article just came out the other day, today, The Atlantic, that Caitlin Flanagan writes that the internet brought porn so good that it led to a generation of men who think of porn not as a backup to having sex, but as an improvement. She says the heterosexual man can now have what many see as a rich sex life without ever needing to deal with an actual woman. So again, the technology makes everything easy. We don't have to do anything hard, anything awkward, anything embarrassing. We don't have to turn into men or women. We can just consume content all day long. The way to understand the boy story, I think, is to think about dopamine, the neurotransmitter in our motivation centers. When you get a little dopamine, it feels really good, but it's not good like, I can stop. It's actually good like, that was great. I want to do it again. I want another potato chip. I want to ride again. You know, when you have kids, they're always saying, again, again, again. That's dopamine. That's dopamine from play. It's social. And the way to think about this, I just asked Midjourney to draw me a boy sitting on the ocean floor with a bunch of nasty hooks around him. And the way it starts is with the video games. The video games are great fun. And you know, as my wife and I found when we let our son play video games when he was 3 or 4, he would get into a groove where he couldn't stop. And then if we took it away, he'd be irritable. And that's a clear sign that the brain has adapted to the level of dopamine. And then it's painful when they don't have it. A week or two, and the brain goes back to normal. The brain will change in both ways. But suppose a boy is playing these intense video games for several hours a day, every day, for years. And then as he gets older, he now goes on porn, just high definition, hardcore porn, accessible everywhere as long as, as long as he has a screen and some privacy. And it moves on to vaping. I can't believe we largely vanquished smoking, teen smoking. We vanquished it, and now it's back with vaping, especially for boys. And then as they get older, they begin to gamble. Sports betting, I cannot believe that we've legalized sports betting in this country. And then investing is gamified. Everything is gamified, and that's to grab the boys. Boys are more susceptible to this. Boys get hooked, and the more you play, the more likely you are to go bankrupt. So it's not just that we're damaging their brains; it's that we're damaging their financial prospects. And my Stern colleague Scott Galloway has been really eloquent on this, on what we're doing to boys and their financial prospects. Just a really amazing demonstration of how something has changed. This interesting conversation between Pat Collison and Sam Altman, founder of OpenAI. Collison points out that when it used to be that there was always, in the software industry, there's always somebody in their 20s was one of the top people. Zuckerberg, Andreessen, Gates, Jobs. They founded their companies in their 20s. They did amazing things in their 20s. But it doesn't seem that's true to me today. And then Altman says, yeah, I'm obsessed with this problem. It's not good. Something has really gone wrong. Where are the great founders in their 20s? I hope we'll see a bunch. I hope this was just a weird accident of history. But maybe something has really gone wrong in our education system or our society. And I think they're right. So I'm going to try a demonstration here. I'm not sure if it'll work, but let's give it a try. I'd like you to name 3 people under 29. Actually, we can change it to 30, because Gen Z is turning 30 this year. So name 3 people under 30 who've made a big impact on the world, such that most of us will know their name. Leave aside athletes and musicians, because the market is such there will always be athletes, there's so much money, and there will always be musicians. Leave those aside. But people who've really made a big impact, done something big, important. Okay, can you think of anyone? Call it out. Malala and? Okay, that's right. So that's, you got them. Okay, can anyone? Okay. Can anyone think of a third? That's a good example, because he is wildly successful within the closed universe of social media. Nothing escapes, nothing gets out. So there is a kind of a black hole where Gen Z is putting all its efforts, but there's like an event horizon and nothing gets out. So Gen Z, you'd know Mr. Beast, but he's not doing anything that affects the world outside. Anyone else? Is there another? Timothy Chalamet, is he an actor? Who is he? Is he? Yeah, they're always going to be actors. Leave aside actors as well. Anyone else? Sam Bankman-Fried. No, he's a millennial. Anyway, you see my point. My point is that no one can think of a man who's done anything big, and no one can think of an American who's done anything big. So this has never happened before. I just looked up. I asked AI to tell me names of, Einstein and Marie Curie and so many novelists. So anyway, something is going terribly wrong. Altman is right. All right, so that's the end of the dark part of the talk. I hope I've convinced you that we are facing something that is at the level of global warming or nuclear war risk or whatever else you want to think of as a global threat. I believe this is a global threat. Just what you need, an additional thing to worry about. But guess what? This one we can solve pretty quickly for very little money. Let's watch, here's how it goes. So parents are the front line here. Parents can push for these 4 norms, And if we do these together, they're not that hard. They're hard to do alone. Many of us parents have been in this situation. My wife and I are in this situation. Where you say, no, you're not going to have social media. And then your daughter says, but I'm the only one. I'm left out. And it breaks our hearts. And we want to let them join in. So there's a collective action problem. It's hard for us to act as individuals as long as everyone else is doing something different. But what if we act together? What if we generally agree that we're not going to give our kids smartphones before age 14? So here are the 4 norms. Just don't give your kid a smartphone before high school. The first phone should never be an iPhone. It should be a flip phone or a simple phone watch, something with no browser. Only give a flip phone or simple phone watch. And I didn't say this in the book because I wasn't sure, but now I'm sure. Don't give an iPad either. Not that they can never use one, but don't give them their own, which they can have a lot, because it's the touch screen, the quick stimulation, which I'll come back to, is the problem. Laptops, I'm still not sure what to say. You're going to have to give them a laptop at some point, given the way the education system is. And it's not as bad as the touchscreen, but there are related problems. So I don't want to say, oh, laptops are OK. But you're going to have to at some point. No social media before 16. This stuff is just wildly inappropriate for children. I mean, imagine if we said, we're all afraid of sex predators getting to our kids on the playground. But they're not on the playground. They're on Instagram. That's where they hang out. And that's where you can reach children anonymously and safely. So the grooming is happening at a mass scale by the millions on social media platforms. And they know this. They know what they're doing. They actually designed it this way to hook kids. They designed it. They knew all about dopamine. They planned it all out. And so I say, what's the right age to let your child get hooked on quick dopamine and talk with strangers and buy drugs online? I say at least 16. You should be at least 16 to do that, is what I'm arguing for. And it's true that if you keep your kids off, they're going to miss out. FOMO, it's true. But think about what they'll miss out on if they do go on social media. They'll miss out on everything else in life. The third norm is phone-free schools. This is the most exciting one because it's happening super fast. The teachers have hated the phones for a long time, but they were just afraid of the parents who would say, but I need to be able to talk to my child at any time. So the central thing is if anyone can send or receive texts, then everyone has to send or receive texts because nobody wants to be the only one who didn't know about the thing that happened in third period. So it has to be a way for the day. Do not accept, parents, do your kids go to schools that say they ban phones, but actually they only mean they ban them in the classroom? That's not a phone-free school. That's just a gimmick. It doesn't really do much. It has to be from when they arrive, they put the phone in a phone locker or a yonder pouch. That's the only thing that gives these enormous benefits. And the fourth norm, far more independence, free play, and responsibility in the real world. If we're going to take away the screens and delay, we don't just want to punish kids and say, don't have this stimulation. The goal is to give them back a real human childhood. That's what we're trying to do here. And so I co-founded an organization with Lenore Skenazy called Let Grow. And our most powerful program is called the Let Grow Experience. It's so simple, and it costs $0 for schools to do this. You send the kids home with a piece of paper that says, talk with your parents, figure out something that you think you can do by yourself, which you've never done before. So by yourself with your parents' permission, but without your parents. And it might be, we suggest maybe you've never walked your dog outside by yourself. Maybe you've never made breakfast. The best one, I think, is if you send kids out to do something in the world. Go to the store, buy a quart of milk. And it's just amazing what happens. So my wife and I did this with our daughter when she was 6. We live in Washington Square Village, and my office is here in Stern. And so Jane sent her with lunch for me down that long driveway, and she had to cross West 3rd Street. Now I cheated in that I came around to watch. Like I was because you're so anxious as a parent the first time. You think, how could she possibly cross the street without getting hit by a car? And she's so cute. The way what she did to sort of, the way she would cross streets back then was like this. She's always a ham, but the excitement, you can see it in these photos. So it changes the kids. They become more confident and more competent, and it changes the parents because we're so nervous the first time, and we're a little nervous the second time. And by the fourth time, we're not nervous anymore because we were doing stuff at that age. We were all out by 6 to 8. For parents in the audience, here are some specific ideas from Lenore. I won't read them, but these are all in chapter 11 or 12 of the book. And I want to give some comforting advice to those of you with young children who think I'm saying you have to raise your kids with no screens. That's not what I'm saying. Let's look at good screen time versus bad. So remember that humans are storytelling animals. We've always raised kids with stories. We use stories, spoken stories, and then later stories, novels, children's books. Stories convey a moral order very quickly and efficiently. So kids need thousands of stories. And a long story teaches them to pay attention and follow plot and character and complexity. So if you want to give your kids, if you want to let them watch a movie on TV together or with you, that's good. There's no problem with that. Not when they're 2, but when they're 4, 5, 6, there's no problem with that. And here's what's really bad, is iPad time. This is fragmenting time. So if you have a kid sitting alone, using a touchscreen, getting that stimulus response reward feedback loop, watching amoral videos or immoral videos or disgusting, degrading videos, and the key thing is they learn, they become experts at judging. Is this the most interesting thing? I've been on this video for 8 seconds now. Go somewhere else. So this is how TikTok shatters attention, because you've become finely tuned to whether this is the most interesting thing you could be doing, or maybe there's something more interesting just a touch away. That's my advice for parents, and very briefly, advice for business leaders. A universal thing that I find when I talk with business leaders is that they are finding difficulty incorporating Gen Z into the workplace. And at Davos 2 years ago, this was the headline. This reporter noticed that whatever the topic was, third industrial revolution, green, whatever, they would always talk about how hard it was, how much they disliked hiring Gen Z. And we have a lot of articles about this. Employers are having a lot of difficulty. Corporate America is struggling to adapt. So I just want to offer briefly just some general advice, because what I can tell you about Gen Z is that they are not in denial and they want to grow. And so if you manage it well, you can mentor them and help them grow. They were deprived of experience their whole lives, and then they get COVID and remote work. So we really need to help them. Hire for anti-fragility. That means the recognition that what doesn't kill us makes us stronger. My last book, The Coddling the American Mind, was about that. And so as Gen Z comes into the workplace, they're going to want all kinds of accommodations. They're going to want for us to take it easy on them when they're having a tough time, as we did in college, as was done when they were younger. And what I'm saying is, don't automatically accommodate their needs. Listen to them, and sometimes they're right. Gen Z kids going into investment banking, they're saying, why should we work 100 hours a week? What's the logic of that? And they're right. So with every generation coming in, you want to listen. But we've generally taken an attitude of, okay, whatever they want, we're going to do, and that doesn't help them in the long run. So don't accommodate automatically. Talk about anti-fragility. I put, if you go to thecoddling.com on the home page, there's chapter 1 of that book, and it explains anti-fragility. And I put it there so that people could download it, you can send it around to everyone in your unit, and if you have that concept of anti-fragility, then you can say, what kind of feedback should I give you? Okay, here I am supervising you. I can do what a lot of people do, which is be careful about hurting your feelings. I'm going to be very gentle. I'll pull my punches. I can do that. Or I can tell you everything you're doing wrong because I want you to get better. And what I find with my students here at Stern, maybe not surprising they're business students, but what I find is 100% say they want the tough feedback. If you frame it that way, then you can do it, and it's good for everyone. But if you don't have the concept of anti-fragility, then it seems like cruelty. So if you frame it the right way, you can do this. All right, finally, some advice for Gen Z. So I teach an undergrad class here, and I see many of you here in the class. And I teach a grad class with similar content. And the heart of the flourishing class is these 3 books, these fantastic, short, easy books. The point of the class is you're going to make yourself stronger, smarter, and more sociable. Because if you can do that, you're going to be more successful in love and in work. And if you can do that, then you're going to be happier. And so these 3 books are so good. I recommend them to everyone in the audience, whatever age. I love these 3 books, and the class does too. But the essential first step in the class is you have to regain control of your attention. So speaking to all of you Gen Z, if you feel that your phone is just a tool that helps you, it's not a problem, raise your hand. How many of you feel that you have no problem with your phones? Okay, some of you do. How many of you recognize more of this picture of it's too much, it's interrupting, it's blocking you? Raise your hand for that. Okay, so that's the great majority. That's what we find in the class. It's not everybody, but it's the majority. So here are some suggestions for how to regain control of your attention, because without your attention, you can't really do anything in this world. And I asked the students, the undergrads were asking for advice, and I said, you know what? I'm going to ask the MBA students, because they're all supervising Gen Z, and this is what they came up with. This is the advice. So advice to Gen Z to stand out, show that you are eager to work in person. Don't make it seem like you would prefer remote work. You want to be part of the team. Be resourceful and independent. Make your manager's life easier. Don't look at your phone while someone's talking to you. So just, it seems like basic advice, but this is how you can impress employers and managers and really make your company better and be rewarded for it. And so those, I believe, are ways that we can roll this back. I've been telling you that I think brains have been growing around phones, sort of like the way this tree grew around this tombstone. But the amazing thing is that we can roll it back. And it starts, please go to anxiousgeneration.com. That's the central hub for everything, for the whole movement. We believe that in just 3 years, we can roll this back. We can free the anxious generation. And it's crazy to say that we're going to try to change childhood around the world in just 3 years. And I didn't say that when the book came out. But given what's happened since the book came out all over the world, parents are rising up. Mothers in particular really felt their kids slipping away. Mothers around the world are driving this passionate movement to reclaim childhood, to reclaim our kids. Our mission is to reverse the two changes, the loss of the play-based childhood and the rise of the phone-based childhood. The book has catalyzed a global revolution. These are just the organizations. Now, many of these predated the book, but there are all these organizations around the world. They're all linking up. We're all working together. This is a map we have on the site. We're promoting policies to restrict social media, have phone-free schools, and give more childhood independence. And most states are enacting at least one of those three. And most of this is just this year. So there's huge progress because this issue is totally bipartisan. We've had a bipartisan wave of support from governors, from congresspeople, from senators. There's been a tidal wave of school districts and states going phone-free, a tidal wave of countries enacting phone-free schools. These are just the few that we know were influenced by the book. Australia, the biggest thing that happened was that Australia is going to raise the age for opening a social media account to 16 and have the platforms enforce it. The Surgeon General called on Congress last spring. And what's most exciting to me is that all around the country, I'm getting reports. People send me emails. They send me photographs. They saw it. They saw an 8-year-old walking to the store, coming back with a quart of milk. And the most touching thing to me is that every school that goes phone-free says the same thing. They say, we hear laughter in the hallways again. That we haven't heard that in a long time. So this is happening rapidly around the world. And please join us. Here's where you can go for more information. And now I welcome your questions. Thank you.
We're going to prioritize questions from students, and students asking questions get a free book for at least the first few. So if you are a student interested in asking a question, raise your hand, and we will bring you a microphone. It looks like we've got some down here and on this side, and then we'll come up to the back.
But just before we do that, I just want to ask a question of members of Gen Z. So if you're born after 1995, raise your hand, please. Okay, so just you. Do you think I largely got this right, or do you think I've largely misunderstood your generation? Raise your hand if you think I largely got this right. This is largely correct. Okay, lots and lots of hands. And raise your hand if you think I've misunderstood you. This is largely incorrect. 1. Okay, 1. Okay, so that's fine. That's fine. Okay, and I'd love to hear. Okay, actually, do you want to tell us what? If you want to ask a question, that would be a great question. If you think. You what? Oh, we need a microphone. So let's start this. So, yeah. Please tell me what you think I've misunderstood.
Well, I didn't have a question, but
okay. But no, what do you something that I said seemed wrong to you?
Yeah.
What do you think?
I just thought I was following until towards the end, until the solution. I don't think that it's a misunderstanding of the generation, but I think society do change the way humans and society interacts evolve. So I don't know if going back to what it was before is the right way to solve the solve the problem. Again, yeah.
No, that's great. That's a very fair criticism, and that's what people say. One of the main criticisms I get is, every new technology that the kids are using, the old people freak out about it, but we adapt. And that is partially true. But I think the way that we adapt is by not giving the kids the technology when they're 2, and by making social media safer, and by having age gating as we do in the real world. So you're right that that societies do adapt. And in 2010, when this all started, a lot of us, including me, thought, what are going to be the effects of checking in with people hundreds of times in a quick way? And I thought, maybe it's going to be good. Maybe it's going to be super social. But now we see it's turned out disastrously. So yeah, I think in 2010, I would have totally said, you might well be right. But I think now we're seeing so much harm that I think we need to do something to adapt. But thank you.
Hi, I'm Gabby. I'm an undergrad. I'm also Gen Z. Thank you so much for your presentation. I'm actually curious about how this correlates with violence. I completely agree with you that we should have phone-free schools. I feel like I've seen my friends float away into their phones as we got older. We all got iPhones, when we started 7th grade. But I'm seeing a return of people wanting to connect still. But one of the arguments that I hear from people in my community, people I talk to, parents really, is with the epidemic of gun violence in America, people feel so anxious about sending their kids to school without a phone. Because God forbid something happens, what if I can't contact them? What if it's the last time I ever hear from them? And I have tremendous empathy for that. I was in high school when Parkland and March for Our Lives happened. So I guess my first question is, what do you say to parents or to people who are just so terrified of this uniquely American epidemic? And then overall, when it comes to the rise in gun violence, particularly among young people and young men, there are people who push back against the idea that cell phones, violent pornography, violent images on social media, on YouTube, violent video games, that it's not really affecting our neural pathways. It's not really affecting our development. I'm curious what your response is to that.
Sure.
And how do you have that conversation?
Yeah, so
Thank you.
For the second part, so much research was, do violent video games make people be violent? And it's still going on. The effects are not big, but that's not the place to look. It's not where they're making kids violent. Is it blocking them from doing everything else in the world? But as for your first question, this is the most emotionally powerful objection. And the way I answer it is like this. Say, I'm a father too. My kids went to New York, still go to New York City public schools. And if something were to happen, and we occasionally get the alert, like something happened, we don't know what, something happened, then all's clear. And so, we're anxious about that. And if it was a shooter, God forbid, I would desperately want to talk to my child. But we have to do what's best for the kids, not what's best for us and our feelings. And what all the experts say is, if there is a shooter, the last thing you want is every kid pulling out his or her phone, talking to their parents, crying, making noise, not paying attention. The parents are rushing to the school, blocks the first responders. That's the worst thing that could happen. What you want the kids to do is what they practiced to do. Pay attention, be quiet, pay attention to your surroundings, and follow instructions. So I understand the emotional appeal, but if we actually want to keep our kids safe, we need to get the phones out of school. Because the phones also contribute to so much in-school violence. In many schools, kids will lure someone into the bathroom and then beat them up so that they can get it on video and then post it. So the phones are causing huge violence problems in schools.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any others? Okay.
I'll go.
I was just curious about the research in the differences between permanent dopamine imbalances as a result of chemical consumption through vapes and THC consumption versus using social media or rapid consumption of like media in that sense? What's the difference between the long-lasting effects for those two different types of
So
dopamine
that's a great question. I don't know for sure. They are biological addictions and behavioral addictions are a little bit different neurologically, but they all go through dopamine. If there's compulsive use, if you can't stop, it's definitely dopamine. Your dopamine circuits have downregulated because of they become less sensitive, so that when a boy is not on a screen, the world is so boring, painful, can't pay attention. Now, your question is about long-term effects. I don't know which one is more likely to have long-term effects, but Anna Lemke, who's one of the main researchers here at Stanford, she says that any kind of addiction is changing your dopamine system, and that makes you more vulnerable to other kinds of addiction. And that most people don't just have one addiction. They often have several. The people who really get in trouble are those with several. So it's a great question. What I can say is that if you're doing this to your brain for many years, during the period of puberty when your brain is rewiring, there is a real risk that it will be a permanent effect. We don't know. And we can open this up to older people too. So.
Hi, I just wanted to say actually thank you. I have an 8-year-old son in a public school here in New York City, and we've had people who are huge supporters of your work lecture at our school, I would say in the last year, probably 2 or 3 times.
Oh, cool.
And my 8-year-old and his friends go and get ice cream together after school. They go to the parks a lot. And I guess, and it's amazing, like they have dance parties and these are boys. But my curiosity is, as they approach middle school, that's my fear, that somehow the video games and the social media and all this. And we've really, I feel like in our community, really made a commitment to keep the cell phones away until 16.
Great.
But are there any specific tips so that we can sustain that to that age?
Yeah. The main one is work together and make sure, and ideally, if you can talk with the parents of your kid's best friend so that it's a group. And then also make it so that, and what you're doing the right thing, make it so that they're not just sitting at home reading books, they're out in the world having fun. What we want is for kids to see that the cool kids are the ones who are out there doing fun stuff, and the kids who are just scrolling all day long are losers. We actually want it to look like that. Because shame is a very, very powerful technique, and if they go on social media, they're gonna have a lot of shame anyway. So that's one technique. Another is, don't be afraid to give them a way to communicate. If you're sending them out, totally fine to have a watch or a basic phone. So, because a lot of parents seem to think, but if he doesn't have an iPhone, how would I ever get in touch with him? And so definitely hold off on the smartphone till high school, and if you can do 16, that's fantastic. That's the best age. I just proposed high school or 14 because I want to get it out of middle school, and I wanted a floor that we could all do. But you're better off waiting until 16 if you can. That's great.
Hello, my name is Isla. Thank you so much for coming to speak with us today. I discovered you in my human growth and development grad class, and my classmates didn't like you, but I thought you were interesting. So I was like, oh, I'm going to come here. But thank you so much. This was really insightful and just such a wonderful way to learn and just sort of get actual data about it instead of, someone from the older generation being like Gen Z, it's because of that damn phone. So that was really helpful. So I was just wondering, while you have shown us that social media has been linked to rising anxiety among young people, especially with young girls, I've also noticed recently it's played a key role in globalization and large-scale organization. Thinking about the sorry, y'all, it's about to be time to break the fast. I'm losing it. In Bangladesh, what recently happened last year, where an organization of students using social media were able to throw the really corrupt prime minister. So I was just wondering, how do you see social media then, or just tech as a whole, as a potential tool for mobilization? And is there a way to harness its benefits while mitigating its harms?
Yeah, great question. So the internet addressed those problems in the 90s. The internet super connected people and allowed people to get information, to organize cell phones, direct communication programs, WhatsApp, texting. All that stuff is very, very good. The question is, what happens when you add on platforms that have super viral algorithms and millions of people? And yes, you can definitely make a social movement go faster that way, but it's really explosive, and you often get you get mob violence, you get mob dynamics. And you get a lot of intimidation. So a lot of movements that are carried out in that way backfire and get reversed. So I think that it's not so clear that super viral social media makes things quicker, but it's not clear to me that it produces better social movements. And in any case, middle school kids shouldn't be doing that. They shouldn't be watching so much news. Middle school kids should be playing and letting their brains develop. So at least, I understand the value for older people, but for kids, let's just keep them off it. So I don't know if we have time for one more question.
We're going to take one more.
Hi, I'm Julian. I'm 32. My younger brother's 22. A lot of this feels very true to me from what I've seen. You gave great advice for parents. You've given great advice for schools and what we do in society. But my question is, there's a bunch of students that we sort of notice are already being impacted by these trends. Like, what do we do to the 22-year-old boys that sort of have already lived through all of this?
Yeah. Well, I can tell you that, in my flourishing class, it's mostly 19-year-old boys and girls, or young men and women. And they make amazing progress. The ones that give up, that reduce their social media usage, they get their lives back. So, the brain is it's much less flexible by your late 20s, but early 20s and teens, you can really change things around a lot. And even if you're in your 30s, you can still change your habits. And you get amazing benefits from changing your habits. So you don't have as much influence, but as an older brother, as a mentor, as a male role model, you could talk to him about ways, about what he wants in his life, what he admires, because he probably doesn't admire guys who just sit around playing video games in their mother's basement all the time. Gen Z is not in denial, and they're looking for ways to escape. So I think you could still have a lot of influence, maybe even more than your parents could on him. So, all right, thanks so much for your attention.
So much.